Hello folks, it's Logger John here, and we're back in the woodshed for some more woodshed ramblings. And today I'm pretty excited because we're going to talk about the Apollo missions. The Apollo missions to the moon were probably one of the greatest things we've did as human beings. 1969, it was over 50 years ago. There was no cell phones, no personal computers, no internet. We didn't even have microwaves. So if you stop and think about that, 50 years ago we flew to the moon. The President of the United States, President Kennedy, 1961, made a speech where he wanted us to go to the moon by the end of the decade.
First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
So that basically gives us about 8 years or so to accomplish this mission. So that was pretty amazing. That's a pretty amazing thing to say, actually, for the President of the United States. Now, if you told someone today that we're going to fly to the moon and get a mission, you'd probably not think too much of it. But back then, like I said, there was no technology. Like even some of the metals that they used in the space, in the rockets, the Saturn V, they weren't even invented yet. So the Saturn V, that's another story. We'll get to that in a few minutes. That was an amazing piece of engineering that they did. We want to mostly focus on the Apollo 11 mission, which took Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to the moon. So what's basically started all the space race back in the 50s, I think it was 1957, the Sputnik was launched by Russia. It was the first artificial satellite, and the Russians were the first to do that. It was called the Sputnik. And when the US saw that, well, they're like, okay, this isn't good, right? They're thinking the worst, like Russia's going to dominate space, they're going to dominate the world. We have to play some catch up. So basically, they poured a lot of money into the space program. So 6 landings on the moon, 12 men walked on the moon. Of course, Apollo 11, Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17. Of course, the technology kept getting better and improved, and they took a bigger payload. They stayed longer. I think Apollo 17, they stayed for 3 days on the surface of the moon. And Apollo, I think it was 15, I'd have to check that, but Apollo 15 was when they brought the moon buggy. It's basically like a dune buggy they took to the moon.
Okay, when he hits the craters and starts bouncing is when he gets his rooster tail. He makes sharp turns. Hey, that was a good stop. Those wheels just locked. Mark off. They want 4 minutes worth, John. Runs a minute and 5.
And it's like basically a car that they had attached to the lander. It was a fold-up car. They had to unfold it when they got there. It had electric motors, and actually each wheel had an electric motor. So it was all-wheel drive, I guess, and all-wheel steering. You can watch some of that online, the moon buggy it was pretty interesting. So they could explore farther, right? They could drive for a few kilometers away from the lander, because apparently it was kind of hard to walk long distances on the moon. It was because the gravity was, you know, a little different obviously than the Earth, and it just took longer to walk places. And some of the astronauts will tell you, like, you could see a mountain or a boulder or something in the distance, and it looked like you could walk there like in like a minute. But meanwhile, it was like an hour away. Just the whole perspective of everything on the moon, the distance was totally different. So that's why they came up with the moon buggy, the moon car, and let them explore a lot farther, which was a good thing. So that was one of the things that came out of the moon missions. Was there was a lot of technology came out of the missions, the Apollo missions that we use today. Even you know, you get people saying, "Oh, it was a big waste of money, and why did they do it?" And there was a lot of things today that we use in our technology was derived from the space program and the Apollo missions, and later on the space shuttle missions. There's a lot of interesting things, and a lot of important things were developed because of that. So the Saturn V rocket, it had almost 8 million pounds of thrust taking off. I think it was like 360 feet tall. It weighed like 3,000 ton. It was just like an unbelievable piece of machinery, or rocket, or whatever you want to call it. It was just unbelievable. It was basically like you're strapping 3 guys on a huge bomb and hoping for the best. A lot of that 3,000 ton was just in the fuel. It had like millions of liters of kerosene and all kinds of different rocket fuel, and yeah, so it was crazy. I think it pulled like, I think they have like 4 or 5 G's of G's taking off in that thing. And basically they were afraid if it blew up, it would be like a small atomic nuclear weapon, actually, if it did blow up on the launching pad.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
So 1969, July the 16th, Apollo 11 was ready for blast off. There was over 500,000 people showed up to watch it. There was over 3,000 journalists came from around the world, and there was also millions and millions and millions of more people watched it on TV too. It was the most watched program on TV at that time. So the Saturn V rocket, we're going to talk about that a little bit. It's basically one of the most powerful machines built by man. Like, some people are wondering why they needed such a big rocket, but well, they needed that big a rocket to have enough speed to propel the astronauts, the spacecraft, out of Earth's orbit. So basically they did, after they blasted off, they did one orbit of the Earth, and then they exited the Earth's orbit. They were going 25,000 miles per hour when they left the Earth's orbit. They needed that speed and that power to pull them away from the gravity of the Earth far enough that the moon's gravity would start to pull them towards the moon.
Sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition. 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff. We have a liftoff, and it's lighting up the area. It's just like daylight here at Kennedy Space Center as the Saturn V is moving off the pad. It has now cleared the tower.
So the Apollo missions at the time were a pretty expensive endeavor, I guess you could say. In today's dollars, I think it was like something in like $280 billion in today's dollars. So it was expensive, but it was a space race. It was more political than anything. I think the U.S. just didn't want the Russians to pull ahead. They were afraid they were going to be the first man to the moon, and they would dominate the space. And then you had the Cold War happening before that, and yeah, so it was an expensive endeavor, but it was still pretty amazing thing that they pulled off with the technology back then. And they did it in 8 years, basically. They went from basically not really a big space program to flying to the moon. And there was supposed to be, so 17 was the last mission, 1972. I was 2 years old. I don't remember it. It was supposed to be 18, 19, 20. I think it was supposed to be up to 21 missions, and they canceled them. It was just getting to be too much money. They already were there. They pretty much knew all they could find on the moon, which wasn't, what was. So that's why they canceled. It's just mostly the money. It was just getting to be too much, and there was people starting to grumble about it. So 1972, that was like 48 years ago, I guess, the last mission to the moon. So at the time, I think there was around 400,000 people employed by NASA back during the Apollo missions, and before that in Gemini missions. Yeah, that's a lot of people. 400,000 people employed. So it was a big thing. And of course there's people who believe we never went to the moon, but there's also people who believe the Earth is flat too. So how do you even talk about stuff like that? I don't know. But as one of excuse me, as one of the scientists said, one of the scientists from the NASA said, it would actually be easier to fly to the moon than to fake a mission to the moon. So the Apollo 11 mission, I think it was over 8 days. From the time they left to the time they came back, it was a little over 8 days, I believe. Spent a couple hours or so on the moon, on the surface. So Michael Collins, he stayed in the moon orbiter, and Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, they left the moon orbiter with the Moonlander and landed on the moon. They left on July the 16th, July the 16th, 1969. Took them 3 days to get there. Yeah, and they accomplished what they. It was a few sketchy moments landing the Moonlander. It was a pretty amazing thing if you think about it. Like if you stop and think about that. They basically strapped 3 guys onto one of the most powerful rockets that man's ever built, and strapped them on and basically told them to hold on, we're going to fly you to the moon. They reached speeds of 25,000 miles per hour when they left the Earth orbit on the way to the moon. Once they got out away from the moon, away from the Earth's gravity, I think they traveled around 2,000 miles per hour until they got to the moon, and there was a few sketchy moments landing on the moon. The mission was almost aborted actually. They had some trouble. They overshot the landing site by about 4 miles. Neil Armstrong basically took over from the automatic pilot control. He took it over and manually landed the lander himself because the original site was, they found there was too many craters and too many boulders, so he had to keep flying. He basically had about 20 seconds of fuel left to land it, and they landed it. And the famous words there, the eagle has landed.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Back to Houston. But they did it, and it was pretty amazing. They actually only spent they spent about 2.5 hours on the surface, or actually they spent 2.5 hours outside walking. I am not sure. They spent a little bit more time on the surface because they didn't. When they got there, they just didn't hop out right and walk around. They stayed in the lander for a little while before they actually were allowed to leave and walk out. And Neil Armstrong was the first man out the door, and climbed down the ladder. They were actually expecting the lander to sink into the sand, into the dust, but on the moon surface, but it actually didn't sink, only a few inches. So that's why if you watch any of the video, the last step is probably like 2 or 3 feet off the surface. They were expecting that the lander to sink in, like I said, and it didn't. So that's why he has such a big high step on the video there. I got a mosquito in the woodshed here, and a few of them. Get out of here. And then the famous words, right?
I'm going to step off the limb now. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Now there's a lot of controversy over that, what he said. If you listen to it, it sounds like he just says it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You don't hear the "ah" in there, but apparently it was. NASA's claiming it was, but you can't hear it. Like it was supposed to be one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, but you don't hear the "ah," the word "ah" in there. So kind of interesting. NASA said there was a bit of a bleep in the communication, that's why you don't hear it. I personally think he didn't say it. He forgot that. I mean, you're on the moon, right? You're kind of excited, so you're bound to forget what you're going to say. So he took the famous steps, and then Buzz Aldrin joined him a few minutes later, and they explored for, like I said, a couple hours or more, just close to the lander.
Some of these small depressions, big spots, and you tend to think, oh, maybe 2 or 3 inches. I can suggest exactly what the layer pictures showed when they pushed away a little bit. You can force.
So the moon is like 380,000 kilometers away, which is what, 280,000 miles away. So they did pretty good to get there in 3 days, I guess. They didn't have to stop for fuel or snacks. Didn't have to stop at Timmy's. You know, they could put a Timmy's on the moon, actually, if they do go back. That would be pretty neat. Like a drive-through Timmy's on the moon. Probably pretty popular for the aliens and stuff. But be a bit of a bummer to drive there to get a coffee.